Welcome to the Pro Ticker Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, and we have a wild one today. So I want you to imagine you're looking at a company that is, famous for completely revolutionizing space travel.
Right, the rockets, the satellite launches, all of that.
Exactly. And this company just pulled off literally the largest initial public offering in the entire history of human capital markets.
Which is a massive story on its own, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the hook for you. Imagine peeling back the outer hull of that gleaming rocket and realizing that there's no traditional engine inside at all.
Yeah, that's the real twist here.
Instead, what you are actually looking at is a $1.77 trillion supercomputer, just, frantically running the infrastructure for a global artificial intelligence arms race.
It really is, I'd say it's the ultimate corporate sleight of hand, because for the better part of 2 decades, the public and the financial markets have categorized this entity strictly as an aerospace pioneer.
Right, we were all focused on thrust and orbital mechanics.
Exactly, catching booster stages in midair, that sort of thing. But while the entire world was looking up at the launch pad, there was this fundamental restructuring happening right under our noses on the balance sheet.
Kind of in the server racks.
Yes, in the server racks. And that restructuring completely shattered the standard models we use to understand technology companies.
Because we aren't really talking about a space IPO anymore.
No, not at all.
The entity that just went public is basically a financial chimera. I mean, it's an infrastructure play that spans the deepest layers of machine learning, the physical power grids of the American South.
The classified networks of the Pentagon.
Yes. And ultimately, the actual thermodynamic limits of outer space. Our mission today is to guide you through all of this, the extreme financial engineering, the geopolitical AI deals, the environmental controversies happening right now on the ground, and the physics that will determine if this massive bet succeeds or just spectacularly crashes.
It's just so complex because the sheer velocity of this pivot is what makes it, really difficult for traditional analysts to model.
Well, how so?
Well, you have a company that is simultaneously attempting to monopolize global broadband, right?
Right.
While also trying to dominate frontier AI development and industrialize low Earth orbit.
Which is just, any one of those objectives would normally consume the entire capital structure of a Fortune 50 company.
Exactly. Attempting all three simultaneously under a single ticker symbol, it introduces variables we simply haven't seen before.
So let's start by looking at the pure scale of what just happened in the capital markets, because honestly, the numbers are almost difficult to process.
They really are. Let's break them down.
They priced, and this is an exact number, 555,555,555 primary shares.
At $135 each.
Right. That is $75 billion in fresh cash raised in a single liquidity event, which means the entire conglomerate was valued at $1.77 trillion on day one.
Which is staggering. And to contextualize that for you, we have to look back at the Saudi Aramco offering.
That was the previous record holder.
Yeah, exactly. And that held the record at roughly $29 billion.
Wow.
And remember, that was a sovereign nation monetizing the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet.
And this offering just dwarfed it.
Dwarfed it by more than a factor of 2. But, the real story isn't just the sheer amount of capital raised.
No.
No, it's the financial architecture that actually allowed them to present this to the public market in the first place.
Ah, right. The accounting maneuvering.
Yes. They utilized a deeply complex mechanism known as common control accounting.
Right, because up until very recently, these were completely distinct operations, weren't they?
Entirely distinct. You had the aerospace and satellite business over here. You had the social media platform, X, over there.
And then the artificial intelligence startup, XAI, doing its own thing.
Right. And historically, those operated in completely different silos. They had different private cap tables, different investors.
So how does common control accounting actually fuse them together?
So common control accounting is a principle typically used when, say, a parent company spins off a small subsidiary, or maybe reorganizes internal divisions.
Okay.
It allows accountants to retroactively recast historical financial statements, as if these distinct entities had always been a single unified business.
Oh, wow. So they just act like they were always one giant company.
Basically, yes. But deploying this specific accounting maneuver to fuse a social media network, a generative AI lab, and a global aerospace defense contractor into a single $1.77 trillion public entity.
I mean, that's unprecedented, right?
Completely unprecedented. It essentially rewrites the financial history of three separate companies to present this unified narrative of compounding growth.
And when you actually dig into that newly unified balance sheet specifically for fiscal year 2025, that narrative is incredibly polarized.
Very polarized.
Because they reported $18.7 billion in consolidated revenue. But the internal dynamics of where that money is actually coming from and where it is going is just staggering.
Starlink is clearly the engine of this entire machine.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a cash cow.
It's a masterclass in unit economics, honestly.
Mm.
In 2025 alone, the satellite internet constellation generated $11.4 billion in revenue.
But the metric that really stands out to me is the profit margin.
Right, the 63% profit margin.
In the telecommunications infrastructure space, a 63% margin is almost mythic.
It really is. I mean, traditional fiber or cellular providers are burdened by this constant capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Digging trenches, laying cable, acquiring cellular tower real estate.
It's so expensive to maintain.
Exactly.
But with Starlink, once they absorb that massive upfront cost of getting the satellites into orbit...
Which is a huge cost, to be fair.
True, but once they are up there, their marginal cost to add a new subscriber is practically zero. They literally just mail you a dish.
And that is precisely the mechanic driving this. They scaled to 10.3 million global subscribers across consumer, enterprise, and even maritime sectors.
Right.
The sky is essentially built, so the revenue flowing back down is just incredibly high margin cash.
And when you pair that with the foundational launch operations segment, which brought in another $4.1 billion...
You have an aerospace division that is just throwing off mountains of free cash flow.
But then, we look at the other side of the ledger, the newly consolidated AI and social media segment.
And this is where the story gets really tense.
Yeah, because this segment pulled in $3.2 billion in revenue, which, sounds solid.
Until you hit the operating expenses.
Exactly. They posted a $6.4 billion operating loss.
Yeah.
So the AI division isn't just spending money, it's practically incinerating capital.
Well, the depreciation schedules on AI hardware are just ruthless.
Right, because the hardware ages so fast.
Right, exactly. When you purchase tens of thousands of top-tier NVIDIA GPUs, you aren't buying an asset that holds its value like, say, a warehouse or a tractor.
Sure.
The compute cycles advance so rapidly that the hardware effectively becomes obsolete. Or at least, highly inefficient.
Within what, a few years?
Within 24 to 36 months, easily.
Mm.
So that massive operating loss is heavily driven by the rapid depreciation of the physical infrastructure required to train these frontier models.
And if we look at the capital expenditures for 2025, out of $20.7 billion total, they poured $12.7 billion exclusively into artificial intelligence.
It's a massive bet.
So let's frame this so the underlying strategy is crystal clear for you listening. It's like, imagine you own the world's most profitable, highly efficient freight railroad.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The margins are spectacular, the trains run perfectly, but instead of paying out dividends to your shareholders, you take every single dollar of profit from that railroad and you just funnel it into a massive, highly experimental supercomputer in the basement of your headquarters.
That's exactly what's happening. The reliable, proven business of space is fully subsidizing the speculative, cash-burning frontier of artificial intelligence.
And that internal subsidy is exactly what traditional Wall Street analysts really struggle to price, right?
No, they hate it. Public market investors usually demand pure-play assets. They want to control their own diversification.
Right, like if I want telecom, I buy telecom.
Exactly. If an asset manager wants exposure to high-margin telecom, they buy telecom stocks. If they want high-risk, high-reward AI infrastructure, they go buy AI equities.
But here,
the governance structure forces them to accept a hybrid. They are essentially buying a municipal utility that has just decided to become a venture capital fund on the side.
which means the clock is ticking. You cannot run a $6.4 billion operating loss forever, even with Starlink's massive cash flow.
No, eventually you have to monetize that basement supercomputer.
Right. And that brings us to the terrestrial data centers, specifically Colossus 1 and 2 down in Tennessee and Mississippi, and how they're using this hardware to execute what is basically a massive compute land grab.
The strategy here relies entirely on raw scale, because hardware is essentially inert without software to run on it.
It's just expensive metal.
Exactly. So to monetize that $12.7 billion in CapEx, The company positioned itself as the landlord of the AI revolution.
A landlord.
Yeah. They aggregated the largest coherent clusters of NVIDIA GPUs on the planet, and then they offered these long-term, high-yield enterprise leasing agreements to the organizations that are just desperate for that compute power.
And the organizations signing these leases, they are not small startups.
Not at all.
Google signed a 32-month, $30 billion cloud computing agreement. Google is literally paying this company $920 million a month just to rent access to roughly 110,000 GPUs.
It's a staggering figure.
And I find this fascinating because Google has spent the last decade building its own custom silicon, right? The tensor processing units, or TPUs.
Yes, they have their own global network of data centers.
So why on earth is Google writing a check for almost $1 billion a month to a third party?
It reveals a really critical vulnerability in custom silicon strategies during periods of rapid architectural evolution.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Google's TPUs are incredibly efficient for stable, predefined tensor operations. But the architecture of frontier AI models right now, it is in a state of chaotic evolution.
So the math is changing.
Constantly. The software frameworks, the routing algorithms, the way mixture of experts models are trained, all of this shifts month to month. And NVIDIA's CUA software ecosystem, which runs on their GPUs, it offers a sort of universal flexibility that custom silicon really struggles to match when the underlying math is constantly changing.
So Google just needed raw, flexible power.
Exactly. Google's internal demand for their Gemini enterprise platform simply outstripped their flexible compute capacity. They needed a massive, immediate injection of raw processing power to avoid falling behind.
But Google isn't stepping into this blind, are they? Because there is a massive operational sword hanging over this contract.
Oh, the termination clause.
Yes, right. If the company fails to deliver the fully operational GPU capacity by September 30, 2026, Google can terminate the agreement entirely or demand steep pro rata fee reductions.
It's a zero-tolerance timeline.
Why so strict?
Because the opportunity cost in the AI sector right now is measured in weeks, not years. If a model training run is delayed by, say, 2 months because a vendor fails to deliver the compute cluster, that company might lose an entire generation of product cycle to a competitor. So Google structured that termination clause to enforce existential urgency on the delivery timeline.
Wow. And we see a similar urgency with Anthropic, right? They locked in a $1.25 billion a month deal through May 2029 for full capacity at Colossus One.
Yes, Anthropic is a massive tenant.
But the tenet that really shifts this narrative from, corporate tech into hardcore geopolitical strategy is Reflection AI.
Reflection AI is a fascinating case study.
Because they signed a $6.3 billion agreement, paying $150 million a month. And for those who don't know, Reflection AI is a relatively new player.
Founded by former DeepMind researchers.
Right, and currently valued around $25 billion. Their focus is autonomous coding agents.
But the emergence of Reflection AI represents a really distinct ideological and strategic divergence in the AI ecosystem.
How so?
Unlike closed, proprietary labs think OpenAI, or Anthropic Reflection's core thesis, relies on open-weight architecture.
Meaning they give away the recipe.
Essentially, yes. They release the underlying parameters of their models, allowing allied sovereign governments and corporations to inspect, self-host, and modify the technology on their own physical infrastructure.
Which explains why they recently partnered to build a 250-megawatt data center in South Korea.
Exactly. They are effectively exporting sovereign AI capabilities to the Republic of Korea.
So Seoul doesn't have to route its secure domestic data through servers sitting somewhere in California.
That is the exact geopolitical utility of the open-weight model. In defense circles, this decentralized approach is increasingly viewed as the United States' primary strategic counterweight to rapidly advancing Chinese AI models.
Like DeepSeek.
Right, like DeepSeek, which are deeply integrated into China's centralized state apparatus. Reflection AI is essentially building a distributed digital defense network across allied nations.
And their relationship with the U.S. Department of Defense really highlights the intense operational realities of this technology.
It does.
Because the Pentagon recently established secure, multi-provider agreements for Impact Level 6 and Impact Level 7 network environments.
And for context, these aren't just secure web portals.
No, not at all. IL-6 and IL-7 environments handle classified data up to the secret and top secret levels. These networks are physically air-gapped from the public internet.
Right. And operating in those environments requires a fundamental alignment on how the technology can actually be deployed.
Which brings us back to Anthropic.
Hmm?
Because the DoD initially evaluated Anthropic for inclusion in these primary supply chains.
They did. But Anthropic maintains strict internal policies regarding the ethical deployment of their technology.
Right.
They explicitly refuse to allow their models to be used for kinetic military operations or, lethal targeting integrations.
So the Pentagon ejected Anthropic from the primary supply chain
Yes, and Reflection AI stepped right into that vacancy.
because they had a different policy.
Reflection AI, alongside legacy defense contractors and hyperscalers like Amazon and Microsoft, agreed to the DoD's standard of unconstrained, lawful operational use.
Okay, so they agreed to the military's terms.
Exactly, which secured their deployment on the IL-6 and IL-7 networks.
And operationally, what does that mean?
It means the U.S. intelligence and defense communities will utilize these advanced models for complex data synthesis, automated target generation simulations, and predictive battlefield logistics directly within classified air-gapped infrastructure.
See, when I look at the flow of capital surrounding Reflection AI and Google, I don't see a standard vendor-client relationship.
What do you see?
I see a tightly closed loop. Let's trace the money. Google was an early investor in this aerospace company back in 2015. Now they are paying them $920 million a month. Meanwhile, Reflection AI raises massive equity rounds from Silicon Valley venture capitalists and then turns around and hands $150 million a month right back to this company to rent the Colossus servers.
It is a tight circle.
It feels less like an open market and more like a centralized command economy where the exact same billions of dollars are just being passed back and forth to inflate everyone's valuations. Are we just watching a giant shell game?
You are identifying the exact structural mechanic that makes traditional macroeconomic analysts deeply uncomfortable with the current AI boom.
I mean, it's highly circular, right?
It is a highly circular capital loop. Massive equity rounds are raised by software startups, only to be immediately transferred as capital expenditure to a handful of hardware and infrastructure providers.
Who then lease that hardware back to the software companies.
Exactly. But the critical question is whether this is merely capital recycling or the necessary synchronized capitalization of a foundational global utility.
A utility.
Yeah. Think about the build-out of the early electrical grid or laying the transoceanic fiber optic cables. Those required similar, highly incestuous consortiums of capital to get off the ground.
That's a fair point. But they aren't content just renting out the hardware, are they? They clearly understand that being a dumb pipe of raw compute power leaves you vulnerable to commoditization.
Absolutely. Which is why they moved aggressively into the software layer.
Yes. They executed a $60 billion all-stock acquisition of an AI coding assistant called Cursor, which was developed by AnySphere.
And that acquisition fundamentally changed the company's position in the value chain
How so?
because they recognize that compute power is merely raw potential. To capture the maximum economic value, you need to own the interface.
The layer where human intent is translated into machine execution.
Right. And Cursor currently dominates that interface for software developers. It generates over $2.6 billion in annualized enterprise B2B revenue.
But Cursor isn't just, a fancy autocomplete that finishes a line of Python for you.
No, not at all.
It popularized the concept of autonomous vibe coding. What is the actual mechanism there? How does that differ from the coding assistants we saw just a few years ago?
So, legacy coding assistants operated on a very narrow context window. They could look at the specific file you were typing in and predict the next few lines based on standard syntax.
Right, like an advanced spell check.
Exactly. But Cursor utilizes an advanced multi-agent architecture and a massive context window. It doesn't just read the file. It utilizes retrieval-augmented generation to understand the entire architecture of an enterprise code base.
Which could be huge.
We're talking potentially millions of lines of code across hundreds of repositories.
So if I tell it, change the authentication flow so users can log in with their fingerprint, it understands all the different databases, the front-end interfaces, and the security protocols that need to be updated simultaneously.
Yes. It takes that high-level prompt, breaks it down into subtasks, delegates those tasks to specialized internal agents, writes the code, debugs its own errors in a sandbox environment, and then presents a fully functional architectural overhaul.
That is wild.
That is vibe coding. The developer provides the conceptual vibe or intent, and the AI autonomously manages the complex syntactic execution.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the strategy here, Buying Cursor for $60 billion isn't just about adding $2.6 billion in software revenue.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about owning the entire cognitive pipeline. Like, if the Colossus data centers are the world's biggest printing presses, buying Cursor is like buying all the world's authors.
That's a great way to put it.
They own the thought. From the moment a developer types a prompt, all the way down to the physical voltage spike in the NVIDIA GPU that processes the request. They own the thought, and they own the muscle.
And that vertical integration is the ultimate monopoly play in the AI era. By controlling the dominant software interface and the largest hardware cluster, they ensure that the massive compute demands generated by Cursor are routed directly to their own servers.
They capture the margin on the software subscription and the compute cycles. But this entire vertical monopoly, this brilliant loop of software and hardware, hits a severe physical bottleneck when you look at where these servers actually live.
The physical reality sets in.
Yeah, because they aren't just floating in the cloud, they're sitting in massive concrete buildings in Tennessee and Mississippi, and the American electrical grid was fundamentally not designed to support them.
The terrestrial energy constraint is honestly the single greatest threat to the artificial intelligence industry today.
It's just a raw power issue, right?
Exactly. The Colossus 1 complex in South Memphis alone demands over 150 megawatts of continuous electrical power.
150 megawatts. That's the equivalent of powering roughly 150,000 residential homes, running 247 without fluctuation.
And unlike a residential neighborhood where power usage spikes in the evening and drops at night, a data center training a frontier model requires a constant, unyielding, flatline power draw.
It never stops.
Never. Furthermore, the immense thermal output of the GPUs requires millions of gallons of water per day for evaporative cooling systems. And the local utilities simply cannot spin up that kind of baseload generation capacity overnight. The grid interconnect queues in the United States currently stretch for years.
So, facing a grid that couldn't support them, the company just bypassed the utility entirely.
They had to.
They went off-grid by installing at least 46 mobile natural gas turbines across the Memphis facility and the Colossus 2 expansion in South Haven, Mississippi.
They essentially built their own decentralized microgrid using combined cycle natural gas turbines.
How does that work?
These turbines burn gas to spin a generator, and the exhaust heat is often used to create steam to spin a secondary turbine. It is highly effective for generating rapid, localized power.
Okay, sounds efficient.
It is. However, deploying 46 of these industrial turbines typically requires exhaustive environmental review and permanent air quality permitting.
Which takes years.
Usually, yes.
Which they bypassed by utilizing a specific provision in the Clean Air Act known as the Temporary Mobile Exemption.
Yes, the loophole.
This loophole allowed them to classify these massive turbines as temporary equipment, permitting them to operate for up to a year without undergoing the rigorous permanent permitting process.
And the utilization of that loophole has triggered an aggressive legal and regulatory backlash.
Which brings us to the lawsuits.
Right. The NAACP, Earth Justice, and the Southern Environmental Law Center have filed active lawsuits.
And what's the core of their argument?
The operational threat to the company lies in the core allegation of these suits, that the continuous operation of these turbines is emitting heavy concentrations of fine particulate matter.
Specifically PM 2.5, right?
Yes, PM 2.5. Into historically marginalized, predominantly black residential neighborhoods.
And from a regulatory standpoint, that temporary window is closing rapidly because the EPA is actively moving to eliminate the temporary mobile loophole, specifically because data centers are abusing it to bypass grid constraints.
It's becoming a national issue.
This isn't just a local zoning dispute, it is destroying their credibility in the institutional capital markets.
The financial consequences materialized almost immediately. Institutional asset managers rely heavily on environmental, social, and governance, or ESG ratings, to construct their portfolios and assess long-term risk.
Right.
Well, just days before the IPO, MSCI, which is one of the premier financial ratings agencies, issued the company a CCC ESG rating.
A CCC rating. That is the absolute floor of their grading scale.
Is the bottom. It indicates critical, unmanaged exposure to ESG risks.
Because of the gas turbines.
Yes, the algorithm that determines this rating flagged the unpermitted fossil fuel generation, the massive water consumption in a water-stressed region, and the governance structure that permitted these evasions in the first place.
Just to put that CCC rating into perspective for you, it is the exact same ESG grade that MSCI assigned to the Russian state following the invasion of Ukraine.
It's a severe penalty. It effectively brands the company as untouchable for trillions of dollars of ESG-mandated institutional capital.
And we saw the real-world impact of that rating on June 22, 2026.
Market reaction was swift.
The stock sank nearly 10.4%, dropping to $165.77. And the timing of this drop was incredibly precarious because the company was right in the middle of attempting to execute a massive $20 billion investment-grade corporate bond sale.
And the bond market is inherently more conservative than the equity market.
Right, they don't like risk.
Yeah, exactly. Equity investors are buying the dream of a $10 trillion future valuation. Bond investors just want to ensure they get their principal back with a predictable yield.
So why do they need $20 billion in bonds right then?
The company needed to sell those bonds to refinance the short-term, high-interest bridge loans they utilized to finance the massive NVIDIA hardware purchases and the cash portions of their early acquisitions.
But when you go to the bond market carrying a CCC ESG rating while facing active environmental litigation that could literally shut down your primary power source, the institutional buyers balk.
The risk premium skyrockets because bond buyers look at the active lawsuits and run a basic scenario analysis.
What happens in that scenario?
Well, if a local judge in Tennessee or Mississippi grants an injunction sought by Earth Justice, ordering those 46 gas turbines offline until permanent permits are secured, the Colossus data centers instantly lose their primary baseload power.
Which cascades immediately into their revenue model. We just talked about Google's $30 billion contract and that strict September 2026 delivery deadline.
Exactly. If the power gets cut, the GPUs go dark.
They breach the delivery clause, and Google can walk away from $1 billion a month in rent.
Anthropic and Reflection AI have similar service-level agreements.
So the entire foundation of this $1.77 trillion global AI empire is currently highly vulnerable to local zoning boards and environmental court rulings in the American South.
The terrestrial constraints are proving to be far more rigid than the technological ones.
But the leadership of this company clearly recognizes this vulnerability. They know they cannot rely on a patchwork of temporary gas turbines and strained municipal grids forever.
No, they need a permanent solution.
And their solution to this terrestrial gridlock is arguably the most audacious engineering pivot we have ever seen. They plan to take the entire physical infrastructure of the AI revolution and launch it off the planet.
Bypassing terrestrial jurisdiction entirely.
Literally taking it to space.
Yes. The Orbital Compute Vision, formerly known as the AI-1 satellite mega constellation, is designed to sever the industry's reliance on Earth's power and cooling infrastructure.
And the scale of this AI-1 constellation is difficult to wrap your head around. They are planning to deploy 1 million specialized data center satellites into low Earth orbit.
1 million.
And these are not the small, shoebox-sized Starlink satellites we are used to seeing.
Not at all. The physical dimensions are monolithic. When fully deployed in orbit, a single AI-1 satellite measures 70 meters across.
70 meters. That is wider than the wingspan of a Boeing 747 commercial airliner.
Yes.
1 million flying server racks, each the size of a jumbo jet.
They require that massive footprint to solve the power generation issue. Each AI-1 unit will feature a 150-kilowatt solar array.
Because in space, you get unlimited sun.
Exactly. By operating in space, free from atmospheric interference and the diurnal cycle of weather, day and night, they can harvest uninterrupted solar energy. It eliminates the need for natural gas turbines or municipal grid interconnects entirely.
Okay, so that solves the power problem, but it introduces a much more complex physics problem regarding heat.
Thermal management in space is brutal.
Because the GPUs generate immense thermal energy. On Earth, they use millions of gallons of water to cool the Colossus facilities. In space, there is no water and there is no air. How do you cool a supercomputer in a vacuum?
This is where we encounter the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. On Earth, thermal management relies heavily on convection and conduction.
Right.
The heat from the processor transfers to the liquid coolant, which carries it to a cooling tower, where fans blow ambient air across it. The heat moves from the hot liquid into the cooler air and disperses.
Right, the heat has a physical medium to travel through.
Exactly. But in the vacuum of space, those mechanisms do not exist. Heat cannot be conducted away, and there is no air for convection.
So where does the heat go?
The only mechanism available for a spacecraft to shed heat is thermal radiation. The heat must be emitted as infrared light directly into the void.
Emitted as light.
Yes, and this process is governed by the Stefan-Boltzmann law.
Okay, physics lesson time. What does the Stefan-Boltzmann law actually dictate in this scenario?
Simply put, the law establishes the relationship between the temperature of an object and the amount of thermal energy it can radiate.
Okay.
Specifically, the power radiated is proportional to the fourth power of the object's absolute temperature. Meaning, if you need a surface to radiate a massive amount of heat quickly, that surface must become incredibly hot.
And according to the design specs, each of these 70-meter satellites is equipped with a 110 square meter thermal radiator.
Yes. And to reject the roughly 700 watts of thermal energy per square meter generated by the dense clusters of NVIDIA GPUs. The Stefan-Boltzmann equation dictates the physical surface of that 110 square meter radiator must reach an operating temperature of approximately 71.1 degrees Celsius.
71.1 degrees Celsius. That's about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. It's scalding hot.
It is.
But here is the paradox. Inside the satellite, those NVIDIA GPUs are incredibly fragile from a thermal perspective.
They're very fragile.
If the internal silicon junction temperature hits 83 degrees Celsius, the chips will thermally throttle to save themselves, drastically reducing compute performance. And if they get hotter, the physical architecture of the chip literally melts.
Exactly. So to prevent that, standard operating procedures dictate that the liquid coolant flowing directly over the GPU cold plates must be maintained at a cool 35 to 45 degrees Celsius.
Okay, wait, so the cooling fluid pulling heat off the computer is 45 degrees Celsius, but the radiator outside the satellite, which is supposed to dump that heat into space, is sitting at 71 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
Heat fundamentally cannot flow from a colder 45-degree fluid into a hotter 71-degree radiator.
No, it cannot. The second law of thermodynamics explicitly forbids spontaneous heat transfer from a colder body to a hotter body.
So if you are trying to picture this at home, it's like, imagine trying to cool down a high-end gaming PC. The only way to push that heat out into a hotter environment is to use active refrigeration. Essentially, you have to plug in a massive air conditioning unit.
That's a perfect analogy.
But running a commercial-grade air conditioner in orbit requires an immense amount of electricity. If they use the solar panels to power the AC unit, they are cannibalizing the exact same battery power they need to actually run the AI models.
Exactly. It's a closed loop that defeats itself.
It's crazy.
The energy penalty of active refrigeration in orbit is catastrophic to the compute per watt efficiency metrics that the AI industry relies on. If half of your 150 kilowatt power budget is consumed just running heat pumps to overcome the Stefan-Boltzmann limit, the economic viability of the satellite just collapses.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative is passive cooling, which requires lowering the radiator temperature to below 45 degrees Celsius so the heat flows naturally.
Okay, so just make the radiator cooler.
But according to the T to the fourth power relationship in the Stefan-Boltzmann law, dropping the temperature that drastically means you have to exponentially increase the surface area of the radiator.
So instead of a 110 square meter radiator, you might need one the size of a football field for every single satellite.
Exactly. And the structural mass, the aerodynamic drag during deployment, and the sheer volume of launching a football field-sized radiator, it makes the launch economics completely impossible.
That is a massive thermodynamic bottleneck.
It's the wall they have to climb.
But let's play out the scenario where, their materials science teams engineer some miraculous solution to the thermal paradox. Even if the physics work on paper, they face a staggering manufacturing and logistical reality.
The manufacturing scale is hard to comprehend.
Because they have to actually build and launch 1 million of these 747-sized data centers.
Right. And the industrial throughput required to achieve this is unprecedented. To reach their stated benchmark of deploying 1 gigawatt of orbital compute capacity by the end of 2027.
Yeah.
The production math requires them to manufacture roughly 6,700 AI-1 satellites annually.
Which breaks down to building roughly 18 massive satellites every single day.
Every single day. And to meet that volume, they're currently constructing the Gigasat factory in Bastrop, Texas.
Which is huge, right?
It's a vertically integrated manufacturing facility spanning 11 million square feet.
But even if they achieve that miraculous production rate in Texas, launching them from the surface of the Earth is the true economic filter.
Earth's gravity well is simply too deep. The fuel and rocket mass required to lift millions of tons of steel, silicon, and solar panels into orbit is just prohibitive.
Right. Even utilizing fully reusable, super heavy launch vehicles, the cost per kilogram to low Earth orbit would bankrupt the project before they even deployed 10% of the constellation.
Exactly. Which is why their S1 prospectus outlines a strategic dependence on the Artemis program.
The international initiative to establish a permanent human presence on the moon.
Yes. The long-term logistical roadmap bypasses Earth's launch pads entirely. The plan is to establish highly automated lunar factories.
So they want to build them on the moon.
By utilizing lunar regolith to manufacture the solar arrays and structural components, and taking advantage of the moon's gravity, which is only 1/6 of that of Earth, the energy required to launch the completed AI-1 satellites into operational orbits is exponentially reduced.
The moon becomes the industrial staging ground for the orbital AI infrastructure.
That's the vision.
And while that sounds like pure science fiction, it is the stated operational plan supporting a $1.77 trillion valuation.
It's in the official filings.
But if we look at the consequences of actually executing this plan, the scientific community is raising massive alarms because putting 1,070-meter-wide objects into orbit creates severe astronomical contamination.
The albedo, or the reflectivity of these structures, is a critical issue.
Because they're basically giant mirrors.
Exactly. Photometric analysis of similar large, flat satellite arrays indicates that the AI-1 satellites will reflect enough solar radiation to appear as bright as prominent navigational stars.
Like how bright?
We're talking measuring between magnitudes 1.0 and 2.2.
So if you look up at the night sky, you won't just see the stars. You will see a million bright, moving points of light.
It creates a pervasive, luminous grid across the entire sky. This constant artificial light pollution will effectively blind ground-based optical astronomy.
Wow, so no more deep space photography.
Right. The long exposure photography required to detect distant galaxies, exoplanets, or near-Earth asteroids will be completely saturated by the bright transit trails of these data centers.
And it's not just visual, right?
No, furthermore, the radio frequencies emitted by the constant uplink and downlink of AI training data will heavily interfere with radio astronomy.
So we're essentially trading our ability to observe the deep cosmos for the ability to train better language models.
It's a significant trade-off.
But the visual pollution is arguably the least dangerous aspect of this because these satellites operate in a harsh radiation environment. Their hardware degrades
Rapidly.
The stated operational lifespan of an AI-1 satellite is only 5 years.
And when you operate a constellation of 1 million satellites with a 5-year lifespan, the replacement math is brutal.
What does that look like?
It means that approximately 200,000 massive satellites will reach the end of their operational life every single year.
200,000 dead, 747 sized objects, weighing tons, flying blindly through low Earth orbit at 17,000 miles per hour.
Yes, and the physical density of objects in those orbital shells will reach critical levels. This dramatically accelerates the probability of triggering the Kessler syndrome.
And the Kessler syndrome is the theoretical threshold where the density of objects in low Earth orbit is high enough that a single collision between two objects creates a massive cloud of high-speed shrapnel.
Right.
And that shrapnel then strikes other satellites, creating more debris, triggering an uncontrollable cascade of collisions.
If a chain reaction of that magnitude occurs within a shell of 1 million massive data centers, low Earth orbit could be transformed into an impenetrable, lethal barrier of debris.
Meaning we couldn't launch anything else into space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The privatization of the orbital commons for compute infrastructure carries the systemic risk of physically trapping humanity on Earth for generations, preventing any future scientific or commercial access to space.
It is an existential level of risk. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle here. Who is actually making these decisions?
The governance structure.
Right. Because when a single corporate entity is gambling with the American power grid, the clarity of the night sky, orbital safety, and $1.77 trillion of capital, you expect an ironclad system of checks and balances.
You would hope so.
But the governance structure here is deliberately engineered to eliminate oversight.
The corporate governance of this entity is radically centralized. The CEO retains an astonishing 85.1% of the total voting power.
Meaning the board of directors, the institutional shareholders, the public markets, their votes are mathematically irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. The CEO has absolute unilateral authority over the direction of the company.
Wow.
Furthermore, the corporate bylaws mandate that all shareholder disputes be forced into binding arbitration, explicitly stripping investors of their right to a jury trial.
So you have no voice and no legal recourse.
Investors are purchasing pure economic exposure to the cash flows of Starlink and the potential of the AI infrastructure, but they are surrendering any mechanism to influence the operational risk profile.
And the mechanism designed to actually motivate the CEO is just as radical. The compensation package isn't tied to standard corporate metrics like, quarterly revenue growth or free cash flow
No,
margins.
the incentive structure is tied to civilizational milestones.
Which is just wild. Explain that.
The CEO was granted an option package of 1 billion performance-based shares. However, the final, most lucrative tranches of those shares only vest if the company successfully establishes a self-sustaining human colony on Mars.
Populated by a minimum of 1 million people.
Yes.
The legal paperwork filed with the SEC literally states that the CEO doesn't fully get paid unless he colonizes a neighboring planet.
It is a level of ambition that defies traditional financial modeling.
But interestingly, the CEO himself seems aware of how this appears to institutional investors. Leading up to the IPO, when facing skepticism about the massive capital loops, the lack of governance, and the sheer scale of the vision, he pointed to a very specific historical parallel.
He compared his company to the 1800s Union Pacific Railroad.
Right. And what do we make of that analogy?
It is a profound and perhaps inadvertently revealing historical analogy, because the Union Pacific Railroad was the visionary infrastructure project of its era, tasked with connecting the American West and fundamentally altering the economic geography of the nation.
It was a massive undertaking.
Huge. It required massive, unprecedented amounts of capital and operated on the very frontier of what was physically and financially possible at the time.
But the history of the Union Pacific isn't just a story of manifest destiny and driving the golden spike.
No, not at all.
It is a story of catastrophic financial maneuvering.
Yes. The project was enabled by the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, which provided the company with massive land grants and government bonds based on the mileage of track laid.
Okay.
But the executives controlling the Union Pacific, figures like Thomas Durant and Oakes Ames, realized that the true profit wasn't in operating the railroad, but in building it.
Ah.
So they orchestrated one of the most infamous schemes in American financial history.
The Credit Mobilier scandal. How did the mechanics of that fraud actually work?
The insiders controlling the Union Pacific Railroad established a separate, independent construction firm called Credit Mobilier of America.
Okay.
Because they control the railroad's board, they awarded exclusive, massively inflated construction contracts from the Union Pacific to their own company, Credit Mobilier.
Oh, wow. So they were effectively billing themselves.
Yes. Using the government subsidies and investor capital injected into the railroad to pay exorbitant, non-competitive rates to their own private entity.
So they siphoned the capital out of the highly regulated public-facing railroad project and funneled it directly into the private, unregulated construction company they owned.
That's all.
And they did this while the railroad itself was struggling, poorly built, and ultimately failed to reach California as originally promised.
It was a closed loop of capital extraction.
Right.
When we look at the modern equivalent, the closed loops of venture capital flowing into AI startups, which is immediately routed to pay exorbitant lease rates for data centers owned by the same interlocking networks of early investors and hardware providers, the historical resonance of the Credit Mobilier comparison becomes deeply complex.
It forces you to ask.
Yeah.
When the CEO compares his multiplanetary AI infrastructure conglomerate to a project synonymous with massive self-dealing, financial opacity, and a failure to reach its stated destination, is that just extreme hubris?
Or is it a warning?
Right. Is it a stark, highly cynical warning to his investors? Is he essentially saying, yes, the capital loops are circular, the governance is a dictatorship, and the physics might be impossible, but this is the brutal, messy reality of how massive, world-altering infrastructure is actually built?
It suggests an operating philosophy that views traditional financial hygiene as a roadblock to civilizational progress. Building the transcontinental railroad, electrifying the nation, or laying the transatlantic fiber optic cables all required ruthless monopolies, massive capital burn, and a deliberate blurring of vendor and investor relationships.
So it's a historical gamble.
The historical gamble is whether this current architecture will be remembered as the engine of a multiplanetary intelligence era or the most elaborate financial mirage of the 21st century. The outcome relies entirely on their ability to actually deliver the underlying technology.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of what we have explored today. The tension at the heart of this $1.77 trillion valuation is unlike anything we have ever seen.
It truly is.
You have a company that has successfully built an incredibly lucrative satellite internet business. But rather than resting on that success, they are risking all of that capital to dominate the physical infrastructure of artificial intelligence.
Everything is on the line.
They are fighting environmental regulators over gas turbines in Tennessee. They're integrating autonomous vibe coding agents into classified military networks. And to escape the power constraints of Earth, they are attempting to launch 1 million flying supercomputers into orbit, risking the very future of space exploration.
It is an unparalleled compounding of risk, and it leaves us with a fundamental paradigm shift.
What's the shift?
Well, for the past 50 years, the primary limitation on computing was human intelligence. The bottleneck was our ability to write efficient code. We viewed software as the ultimate frontier.
Right, getting the code right.
But as systems like Cursor move us toward autonomous code generation, the software bottleneck is dissolving. The ultimate ceiling on artificial intelligence is no longer cognitive, it is physical.
It's the hardware.
The final boss of the AI revolution is the rigid, unyielding laws of physics. The thermodynamic realities of heat rejection in a vacuum, the gravitational penalty of the rocket equation, and the baseload limitations of terrestrial power grids.
So as you evaluate this new era of corporate infrastructure, the core question isn't whether the AI models will get smarter.
No.
The question is whether you believe $1.77 trillion of capital is enough to out-engineer thermodynamics.
That is the defining question of this technological cycle. You look at the architecture of this company, and it resists simple categorization. It is a sprawling, deeply controversial organism attempting to rewrite the rules of finance, software, and physics simultaneously.
It will either evolve into the backbone of a multiplanetary digital economy, or it will collapse under the weight of its own thermal exhaust. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the hardware beneath the software. That is where the future is actually being forged.